I still remember the day we bought that apartment. The day everything quietly began to change. It was a bright afternoon when we first walked into Grayford Residences, a newly built complex that gleamed like something out of a commercial. Fresh paint, glass doors, marble tiles still smelling of polish. Everything looked perfect. My mother, Maria, had always dreamed of owning a place like this. Clean, modern, peaceful. But that day, when she stepped into the flat, her face changed. At first, it was subtle. She walked slowly across the living room, her eyes moving from corner to corner as though trying to read something invisible on the walls. Then she paused, right at the middle of the hall, and whispered, almost to herself, "This house feels strange." I looked at her, confused. Strange? What do you mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she went to the window, looked outside at the empty street below, and smiled faintly. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was almost as if something behind that smile was holding her. After a long moment, she turned back to me and said, with a voice that carried both hesitation and certainty, "We'll take this one, no matter what happens. This is the one I want." My brother, Daniel, and I exchanged glances. We both felt something off about that tone. The way she said it, as if she was agreeing with someone we couldn't see. The deal was done. Within a week, the keys were in our hands. The first night after signing the papers, my mother fell sick. It came out of nowhere. High fever, body trembling, her skin turning pale as if she had been outside in winter air. The doctor said it was probably just exhaustion, but her eyes, they looked distant. When she stared at us, it didn't feel like she was looking at us. It felt like she was looking through us. When we moved in a few weeks later, I remember how silent the flat felt. Too silent for a place inside a busy city. Even our footsteps seemed to echo longer than they should. The walls carried every sound like a whisper traveling in circles. That night, while unpacking boxes, I felt a sudden gust of cold air from the hallway. I thought one of the windows was open, but all were closed. Still, the curtain near the living room swayed, brushing against the floor as if someone had just passed through. My mother sat in the corner of her new bedroom, staring at the ceiling. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly. "Hear what?" I asked, pausing. "That hum, like someone breathing." Behind the wall, I listened. There was nothing, only silence and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. But she kept staring, her hands clutching the bedsheet tightly. The next morning, she seemed fine, cheerful even. She started arranging things, humming to herself while moving the furniture. When I asked her about what she said last night, she brushed it off with a smile. "I was just tired," she said. "This house will be good for us. I can feel it." But the way she said feel made me uneasy. Over the next few days, strange little things began happening. Lights flickering even though the wiring was brand new. Footsteps echoing when no one was walking. The faint smell of wet earth like something old and damp drifting through the corridor, though it hadn't rained in weeks. Then one evening, my brother and I were watching TV in the living room when the air suddenly turned colder. I noticed the reflection on the darkened TV screen. Someone standing near the kitchen door. A tall, slim figure, with hair falling over the face. For a moment, I thought it was my mother. "Mom," I called softly. No reply. The figure stood still, its head tilted slightly, almost curious. Then, slowly, it turned and vanished into the darkness of the hallway. Daniel jumped up, switching on the lights. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. We ran to our parents' bedroom and found my mother asleep, breathing quietly, her body completely still. My father, Robert, was awake, reading a book. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking a little. "Did Mom just go to the kitchen?" He looked at me blankly. "What?" "No, she's been asleep for the past hour." Daniel and I looked at each other again. Neither of us spoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around AM, I woke up to the sound of something faint like humming. It was coming from my mother's room, a low rhythmic tune, almost like a lullaby. I walked quietly to her door, peeking through the small gap. She was sitting up on the bed, facing the window. Her hair was messy, her head tilted unnaturally to one side, and she was humming the same tune I'd heard earlier. But her lips weren't moving. The sound was coming from somewhere else, somewhere around her. Then, suddenly, she turned her head toward the door, fast, too fast, and I caught her eyes. They were open wide, glowing faintly in the pale moonlight. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. When I opened the door fully, she was lying down again, fast asleep. The humming had stopped. I stood there for a long time, staring at her, afraid to blink. Because even though she looked asleep, I could swear that her lips were curling into a quiet, knowing smile. And in that moment, deep inside me, I felt it. The apartment was not empty. Something else had come to live with us. The night after I saw my mother sitting up in bed, something inside our home changed. Subtly at first, then unbearably. The air felt heavier, as if the rooms themselves were exhaling something we couldn't see. The walls seemed to have learned how to breathe. Every sound lingered a second too long. Every reflection in glass, in the black surface of the TV, even in the kettle carried a faint outline that didn't belong to us. But the strangest change was in my mother, Maria. She had always been gentle, soft-spoken, calm. A woman who believed that light and prayer could chase away anything. But now, she rarely smiled. She walked slower, like someone listening to voices we couldn't hear. That morning, I noticed her standing at the hallway window. The blinds were closed, yet she was staring through them, whispering under her breath. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't move. "She's here," she murmured. "She said she likes this place too." I froze. "Who?" For a second, my mother turned toward me. Her face looked pale, her eyes unfocused, like she was half awake, half somewhere else. Then she blinked rapidly, her expression softening. "No one," she said, forcing a smile. "I was just praying." But her tone didn't sound like prayer. It sounded like obedience. That evening, she complained of a severe headache. Her skin burned with fever again. We brought in another doctor. He said it was stress. Nothing serious. Gave her sedatives and left. But the medicine didn't help. Around midnight, she started mumbling names. Not ours. Strange, old-fashioned names. "Lena, open the door." I said I'd come back, didn't I? I said I would. I stood at her bedside, watching her whisper to the darkness beside her. Her hand reached out, as if stroking someone's hair that wasn't there. "Mom," I whispered. Her eyes opened suddenly, and she gripped my wrist so tight I felt her nails dig into my skin. "Don't go near her," she hissed. "She doesn't like men in her room." "Who doesn't?" She put a finger to her lips, her gaze fixed at the empty corner of the room. "She's listening." The next morning, her fever broke, but she looked worse, as though something had drained the color out of her face. She didn't remember anything from the night before. When I showed her the small scratches on my wrist, she looked horrified, then confused, and finally, she laughed nervously. "You must have hit something in your sleep," she said. But I hadn't. That night, my brother Daniel and I decided to keep an eye on her room. We turned off the TV early, pretending to go to bed, then sat quietly in the dark living room, watching the reflection of the hallway in the glass balcony door. At exactly 1:47 a.m., we heard it, a faint humming, the same tune I'd heard before. Daniel frowned. "That's Mom," he whispered. We both stood up and moved toward her room. The door was slightly open. A dim light spilled through the crack. I could see my mother sitting again. Same posture, head tilted to the side. But there was something else. A figure, faint, transparent, like smoke, stood right behind her. Its outline shimmered in the half-light. A woman, tall and thin, with long hair falling over her face. Her head rested close to my mother's ear, as if whispering something. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Daniel reached for the switch. The light flicked on, and the figure was gone. My mother slumped back on the bed, gasping, her eyes rolling upward. We rushed to her. Her skin was freezing cold. "Mom, Mom, can you hear me?" I shook her gently. Her lips trembled, forming a single word. "Stay away." Then she went completely still. We called an ambulance. The doctor later said she'd had a minor stroke, one side of her body paralyzed. "It can happen from stress," he said, "or trauma. But what kind of trauma makes someone talk to invisible people in their sleep?" After that night, she was no longer the same. Her right side wouldn't move, and her speech was slow, but sometimes late at night, she'd start muttering again. Sometimes, she'd smile at empty air, as if listening to someone only she could hear. We hired a caretaker, young woman named Lena. She was kind and patient, though a little nervous in the new apartment. On her second night, she came to me with pale cheeks and shaking hands. "Sir," she said softly, "does your mother walk at night?" I frowned. "She can't walk. Half her body's paralyzed." Lena's eyes filled with confusion. "But last night, I saw her, standing near the balcony. Her hair was longer, and she was whispering something. When I called her name, she turned her head, she swallowed, but her face wasn't your mother's." I didn't know what to say. That night, I locked my door, but around a.m., I heard footsteps again. Slow, dragging ones moving across the living room floor. They stopped right outside my door. Then came a soft knock. 3 times. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I just stood there, my heart beating so loud I could hear the echo in my ears. And then a voice came, faint, almost gentle. "Ethan, she wants to see you." It was my mother's voice, but it was coming from the wrong side of the door. The next morning, Lena quit. She didn't even come to collect her pay. She left a note on the table. It said only 4 words. "There are 2 of her." After that, no one in the family slept properly. The air in that apartment turned poisonous. Not with smell, but with something unseen. Something that fed on fear. Even my father, who never believed in ghosts, started keeping a cross under his pillow. He said it was just for faith, but I saw how his hands trembled every time the lights flickered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up to the sound of soft singing. The same tune my mother hummed that first night. But every time I looked into her room, she was asleep. Or at least, I thought she was. Because once, just once, when I stepped closer and looked carefully through the half-open door, I saw her reflection in the mirror, and behind her reflection, another face was smiling back. The caretaker's note stayed on our dining table for days, untouched. None of us had the courage to throw it away. Those 4 words, "There are 2 of her," felt like a warning carved into our minds. After Lena left, the apartment felt emptier, but somehow more alive. The silence itself began to change. It was no longer peaceful. It listened. The sound of a plate clinking, a chair sliding, even our footsteps seemed to echo back, slightly out of rhythm, as if something else was moving a half-second behind us. I started to keep my phone recording during the night. Every morning, when I played the recordings back, I heard faint sounds that weren't ours, whispers, dragging footsteps, a woman humming offbeat lullabies. Sometimes I heard a voice that sounded exactly like my mother's, but distorted, slowed down like it was coming from water. And yet, every time I'd check on her, she was lying in bed, half asleep, paralyzed on one side, barely moving. It didn't make sense. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the kitchen. I tried to ignore it at first, but it grew louder, rhythmic, like fingers drumming on metal. I finally got up, grabbed my phone, flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The apartment was dark, only the pale glow of streetlights cutting thin lines across the floor. The tapping stopped the moment I entered the kitchen. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The refrigerator door was slightly open. Inside, something had smeared against the cold, white wall brownish-red streaks that looked like dried blood. And there, in the faint reflection on the shiny door, I saw her, my mother, standing right behind me. Her head was tilted, hair covering most of her face, her lips curved in a strange, trembling smile. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned around, but there was no one. The kitchen was empty. I stumbled backward, shaking, and nearly dropped my phone. I looked at the reflection again, and she was still there, only now, her mouth was open, screaming silently. The next morning, I told my father what I'd seen. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "You're seeing things, Ethan," he muttered. "It's stress. This place is new. Your mother's condition. It's too much for all of us." But I noticed something trembling in his voice. Fear. That evening, Daniel came home late from work. He looked pale, sweating. "Ethan," he whispered as soon as he came in. "I saw Mom. She was sleeping," I said. "I just checked." He shook his head violently. "No, she was outside. I was parking my car and saw her standing at the main gate." But her face. He paused, his hands shaking. Her face was wrong. It was like she was smiling too wide. Her jaw looked, he swallowed hard, broken. We ran to our mother's room. She was in bed, fast asleep, her breathing slow, steady. The right side of her body still paralyzed, but her pillow was wet-soaked, as if she'd been outside in the rain. We didn't have rain that night. Over the next few days, the house started breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. Doors opened slightly on their own. Air rippled through the curtains when no wind blew, and faint shadows crossed the hallway even when no one moved. One evening, my father invited a local priest, an old man with tired eyes and a silver crucifix around his neck. He didn't laugh at us or call us crazy. He just walked around the flat silently, touching the walls, whispering prayers in a low voice. When he came out of my mother's room, he looked shaken. "This place is not clean," he said softly. "Something attached itself here. It's old, very old. It's not your mother that's sick. The sickness lives through her." "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "There's another presence, mimicking her. You'll see it again. It always wants to be seen." He refused to stay for the night. Before leaving, he gave me a small wooden cross and said, "If she calls you after midnight, don't answer. Whatever speaks isn't her." That same night, the apartment descended into chaos. Around 3:10 a.m., Daniel burst into my room, screaming, "Ethan, Mom's walking." I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway. The lights were flickering violently, shadows jumping across the walls like waves. My mother was standing near the living room, facing the wall. Her left hand, the only one she could move, was dragging slowly across the wallpaper, leaving a dark trail. "Mom," I said softly. She turned. Her head rotated far too much, almost 180 degrees, until I heard a crack. Her eyes were open wide, and for a second, her pupils flickered like candle flames. She smiled. "Ethan," she said, but her voice wasn't hers. It sounded like two voices speaking together. One deep, one light layered, echoing. "She wants you to stay." I stumbled backward. Daniel grabbed my arm. "That's not Mom," he hissed. Her body twitched, spasm. Then she began to laugh, a low, broken, gasping sound that grew until it filled the whole room. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The apartment plunged into darkness. The only sound was her laughter, and then another voice, whispering close to my ear, though no one was near me. "You brought her back." I ran to the fuse box, switched everything back on. The lights flickered to life, and my mother was gone. Only the dark trail of her handprint remained on the wall, ending abruptly at the floor. We found her minutes later, lying motionless in her bed, breathing shallowly. But when I touched her arm, realized something cold and horrifying. She was drenched, her hospital gown soaked through, like she'd been standing outside in the rain again. The rain that never came. That night, none of us slept. My father sat in the living room with the cross, whispering prayers under his breath. Daniel refused to enter Mom's room again. As dawn broke, I sat by her bedside, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. But then I noticed the mirror beside her. It had fogged over completely, and written in the fog, with long, uneven strokes, were 3 words. "Let me in." I stared at those words for minutes, too afraid to breathe. When I finally wiped the mirror clean, I saw my mother's reflection, and for a second, it smiled back before she did. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The light that entered through the curtains looked dull, lifeless, almost gray. The air was thick, unmoving, and smelled faintly of something metallic, like rusted blood. After the words, "Let me in," appeared on the mirror, I didn't dare tell my father or Daniel. They were already breaking apart. My father sat in the living room every night now, cross in hand, mumbling prayers until his voice cracked. Daniel barely came home at all, and my mother, she had stopped speaking altogether. Her eyes followed movement, but not meaning. She'd sit in bed, head tilted, her lips twitching like she was whispering silently. Sometimes, she'd laugh under her breath, a dry, hollow laugh that had no joy, only echo. On the 3rd day, tried to feed her. The spoon of soup stopped halfway to her mouth, because she turned to look at me slowly, mechanically, and said in a flat, emotionless voice, "You shouldn't feed me when she's hungry." "Who I asked quietly. Her lips curved slightly. You'll see her soon. That night, I recorded everything again. My phone caught faint breathing sounds that grew louder with time. Too loud to be from a single person. At one point, the recording picked up 2 sets of breathing. One shallow and rapid, one deep and ragged, as if someone stood right next to the microphone. But I was alone in my room. At exactly 2:58 a.m., the lights in the corridor started flickering. From my bed, I could see shadows stretching across the wall, long, twitching, moving against the light instead of with it. I got up slowly, my legs trembling, and stepped out of my room. The sound of something dragging echoed faintly from the kitchen, like nails scratching across tile. "Mom," I called softly. No answer, only that scraping noise, slow and deliberate. As I stepped closer, the air turned colder, my breath fogged. I turned the corner and froze. My mother was there, kneeling on the kitchen floor, her body twitching. Her left hand was pressed flat against the tiles, and she was licking something off them. The light above her flickered violently, casting bursts of shadows across her face. I took a step closer, horrified. "Mom, what are you doing?" She stopped. The sound of her tongue against the floor went silent. Slowly, she turned her head toward me. Her mouth was red. "It tastes like her," she said softly. My stomach turned. I stumbled backward. She stood up in a single jerking motion, too fast, too sudden. Her head tilted, her mouth twitching as if smiling and crying at the same time. "You shouldn't have opened the door," she whispered. I didn't, but before I could finish, every window in the apartment slammed shut at once. The lights burst, plunging the room into strobing flashes of white and black. The air filled with the humming sound, low, electric, vibrating in my bones. I saw her shadow twist behind her, growing longer, taller, wider until it separated. Another figure was standing there, the same height, same hair, same shape, but its movements were wrong. Too fluid, too silent. It turned its face toward me, and though it had my mother's features, the mouth stretched unnaturally wide, splitting her cheeks until I could see the blackness inside. It smiled. "Do you know what she gave me?" the voice said, echoing from both figures at once. I backed away, but they followed, one limping, one gliding. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached the hallway, but the door to my room slammed shut behind me. "Ethan," one of them hissed. "You wanted her back. Now you have both." Then, both figures lunged forward. I grabbed the wooden cross from the shelf and held it out. The air exploded with a sound like shattering glass. The lights flickered back to life, and the second figure was gone. My mother collapsed onto the floor, trembling violently. I rushed to her side, shaking. Mom, please." Her eyes snapped open. For a second, I saw something move behind them, like shadows swimming in black water. Then she screamed, not a normal scream, but something that came from deep inside her chest, raw and endless. My father and Daniel came running. Together, we lifted her onto the bed. She kept thrashing, her voice breaking into 2 distinct tones, one high, one low, overlapping in horrifying harmony. "Get out," she shrieked. "She's mine. She's mine. Hold her," my father yelled. I tried to grab her hands, but she was too strong. Her left hand, the only one she could move, gripped my arm so tight I felt the bones grind. I screamed in pain. Daniel tried to pull her off, and that's when her eyes rolled back completely, only white, and her mouth fell open. From deep inside, a gurgling sound emerged, like someone drowning in mud. Then she whispered, in a voice that wasn't human. She said she wanted to stay, so I let her in. Her body went limp. The lights flickered once more and died. The room plunged into darkness. A faint glow appeared near the mirror, a reflection that didn't match reality. I looked up and froze. In the mirror, there were 2 women standing beside the bed. One was my mother, lying unconscious. The other, the shadow, was standing, staring directly at me. Her mouth moved silently. I stepped closer, unable to look away. Her lips formed the words, one by one, "She's not yours anymore." The mirror cracked from the inside, a jagged line splitting her face in 2. The sound jolted everyone awake. My father clutched his chest, gasping. Daniel turned to me, tears in his eyes. "We need to leave, Ethan. Now." But I couldn't move. I stood frozen beside my mother, watching as her hand slowly rose, even though she was unconscious. Her fingers curled into the bedsheet, and she whispered, without opening her eyes, "Don't let her find me." Then her body arched, back bending in an unnatural angle, and her jaw dislocated with a sickening crack. From her open mouth came a voice, soft, female, but not hers. "You already did." The lamp beside the bed shattered, plunging us into chaos once again. My father screamed. Daniel pulled me out of the room. The door slammed behind us so hard the frame cracked. And then silence. Only my mother's faint humming drifted through the wood, that same lullaby she never stopped humming. But the voice singing along with her was no longer hers. It was the other one's. The following morning was deathly silent. No birds, no sounds from the neighbors, not even the usual hum of the city. It was as if the whole building was holding its breath. My mother lay unconscious in bed, her body rigid, her face pale as marble. The cross on her nightstand was bent, twisted, like it had been clenched in a fist of pure heat. We didn't speak much that day. My father called for help, doctors, priests, anyone who would listen, but the line kept cutting off. When a nurse finally arrived, she lasted barely 10 minutes inside the apartment before running out, trembling. She said the walls moved. That night, we brought in a woman named Lydia, a caretaker from another district, strong, calm, the kind who had seen everything. She told us not to worry, that she'd take good care of my mother while we rested. We wanted to believe her, but by midnight, belief had no place here anymore. I woke to a crash. Something heavy had fallen. My heart pounded as I sat up, hearing distant murmurs, voices overlapping, whispering in rhythms that made no sense. Then came a loud thud, followed by a scream, "Help! Somebody help me!" It was Lydia. I rushed to my mother's room. The moment I reached the door, it slammed shut in my face. From inside came the sound of furniture scraping violently, glass breaking, and that horrible choking sound, a wet struggle. "Mom, Lydia," I yelled, pounding on the door. The air turned freezing cold. My breath fogged in the dark hallway. From under the door, a black liquid began to seep thick, tar-like, and moving against gravity, crawling up the wood. I took one step back as my father came running with Daniel behind him. Together, we forced the door open and froze. Lydia lay sprawled on the floor, her eyes wide open, her throat covered in deep purple marks shaped like 5 fingers. Her mouth hung open, gasping for air that would never come. And my mother, she was lying calmly in bed, her eyes closed, her paralyzed body perfectly still. "She did this," Daniel shouted, but his voice cracked. "How? She can't even move." We didn't know what to say. The nurse's body was cold, already far too cold for the few seconds since her death. I reached for her pulse, and that's when I noticed it. Her hair. It was turning white, strand by strand. The black faded to gray, and then to ash. From the corner of the room came a soft hum, the same lullaby my mother used to sing when I was little. But her lips weren't moving. The sound came from the closet. Daniel stepped forward, hand trembling on the knob. He looked at me once, silently asking if we should. I nodded. He opened the door. Inside, there was no body, no shadow, just the faint scent of something burnt. But on the back wall of the closet, words had been scratched into the wood. "She lives where mirrors bleed." And below that, a handprint, black, wet, and human-sized. We left the room and locked it. My father called the police, but when they arrived, the door wouldn't open again. The officers pushed, kicked, even tried breaking it, but it was like the wood had turned to stone. The power went out. Then, everything went black. We huddled in the living room with candles. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I could hear faint whispering, the same voice that haunted our nights. Daniel was shaking. "She's not Mom anymore," he said quietly. "You saw her eyes. You saw what she did." My father gripped his cross. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not stronger than faith." He stood up and began reciting prayers, his voice trembling but firm. The candle flames flickered violently, and then one by one, every candle went out. The apartment plunged into blackness. In that instant, I felt it, something brushing past me. Cold, wet, heavy with the smell of decay. Then, from down the hall. My mother's voice floated softly through the dark. "Why are you hiding?" My blood ran cold. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam shook as it caught her standing at the far end of the hallway, her head bent, her arms hanging stiffly at her sides. "Mom," I whispered. She took one step forward. The light flickered, distorting her face. Her mouth hung open wider and wider until it tore slightly at the edges, black veins spreading across her neck. She whispered, "It's her house now." Her voice wasn't just hers, it was layered, echoing like two voices speaking at once. Daniel screamed and lunged forward, pulling me back. "Run!" We stumbled toward the door, but the main lock twisted on its own, metal bending like clay. Behind us, the humming started again, low, rhythmic, like something ancient being chanted backwards. The lights flashed once, revealing her crawling across the floor on all fours. Too fast, too wrong, her head twisted at an impossible angle, her eyes glowing faintly white. We tried the window, but they wouldn't open. My father shouted a prayer and threw the cross. The moment it left his hand, the metal caught fire mid-air, burning bright for a second before dropping to the floor in a hiss of smoke. Then everything stopped. Total silence. We didn't breathe, didn't move. Then my mother's body stood straight again. She smiled, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Go," before she changes her mind. The front door unlocked, just like that. We didn't wait. We didn't pack. We just ran. As we left the apartment, I turned back one last time and froze. In the living room window, I saw two figures standing side by side. Both were my mother, one smiling softly, the other staring blankly at me. When we finally reached the street, the sky above the building turned unnaturally dark, clouds spiraling above it, though the air was still. From one of the windows, a faint light blinked once, twice, then went out forever. We moved far away after that. My mother survived. Barely. Half her body remains paralyzed, and she rarely speaks. But sometimes, at night, she hums that same lullaby again. And when she does, mirrors near her bed begin to fog, even when the air is still and cold. Once, I asked her softly, "Mom, do you remember what happened there?" She turned her eyes toward me wide, trembling, and whispered, "She's still there, Ethan. Waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. Her lips quivered into a faint smile. "For someone else to buy her home." The end. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.